Hey guys, welcome to Laurie's Little Studio. I'm Laurie, and today I have this in front of me. This is the Gutermann Creativ threads that I purchased the other day in response to the fact that I did not have these spring colors that I really wanted for the table runner, which I've decided is next on my list of projects because it is really, today is April 1st. I mean, it's really racing up on Easter here. So I'm happy that this arrived, and I want to see what these Gutermann colors look like next to these little panel pieces that I have. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. I think the ones that I'm using are folded up in, yeah, here they are. Now, if you, maybe I did not film that, or I don't know. I might have to find that video. So this is an iron-on interfacing. It has the little glue dots on one side and it is smooth on the other. As you can see, it also has a grid so that if you are going to quilt something and you don't really feel like, you know, drawing all these lines, then you can use these lines if they show through your fabric. And the few times that I have used it, I have actually been able to see those lines, but I'm not seeing the lines now. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to cut 4 pieces of this that are basically the same size as these rectangles that I have here, and I'm going to not iron it on. I am going to stitch all the way around, and then I will cut an opening in the back, turn this, because this will be stitched on this way, and then turn it right side out, and then press it to my fabric, just because it will be, I just need to do it. So first things first, I need to cut 4 pieces that are properly sized, and in all honesty, this is one of my favorite projects to do. At this point, it doesn't matter if I use the thread that I have already threaded in George. That's going to be just fine. If it were bright red, maybe. Okay, so here's a trick. You want the little bubbles that are going to glue this down to the wrong side of your fabric to be in the correct place. Well, how do you figure that out? If I stitch this with the bubbles face up and my fabric face down, and then I just decide, okay, now I'm going to flip it to the inside, my bubbles are on the wrong side. So they need to be considered the wrong side of your fabric. This is the right side. The smooth side that won't press to the fabric is face up. So right side's up, and this right side's down. So the right sides are supposed to be together. Okay? And you can check it just by folding this back and then doing that. And now the glue dots are on the inside, and we'll press this nice like that. Now, some prefer to go ahead and cut a little opening, just enough to get your scissors in there once you've made this little fabric applique. So I am doing that. All right, so glue dots are wrong side and they're facing down. Smooth sides facing up. The right side of my fabric is facing the right side of my press-on interfacing. And now I'm going to stitch all the way around. I'm not stopping, I'm not leaving any openings. All of them are stitched. 2 of them have an opening and 2 don't. I wanted to show you how to create that little opening if you don't do it before you stitch all the way around. You have to make sure that you have your fabric pulled away from the interfacing. That fusible interfacing needs to be as far from that fabric as you can get it. Take your time. You know, you can be cavalier and careless, but you might cut your fabric. Okay, so now I'm going to use my paper cutting scissors, and I'm just going to make a little snip right into the interfacing like this. So these have been done, and this one has been done. This one has not been done. So once again, just separate the 2. Fabric. Easier said than done. Actually, it's not that difficult, so I don't know why there's a problem. There we go. So here's my fabric way pulled away, and I'm trying to keep the little piece of interfacing that I'm cutting, I'm trying to keep that section centered. I don't want it down here. I don't want it around on an edge. It needs to be pretty much right in the middle. And just make a little snip. Okay. Now, going back to the first one, I do want to trim around the outer edges. I know I'm using my Kais, but I'm not 100% sure that these paper cutting scissors can cut the fabric. They might. Well, they are. They are gingers after all, but they're not consistently good at cutting my fabric, so I don't use them for that anymore. Okay, we're going to cut the corner off at an angle without cutting the stitches. And I'm trimming these down to about 1/8 of an inch, which I'll be happy to show you in a moment. Let's get this corner cut first. Okay, so there that is, and that's how I'm cutting those corners, like that. We're going to do all of these squares, but I will take you through one first. Now the reason I'm trimming this is I want this to be tidy on the inside, and it pretty much needs to be trimmed in order for that to happen. Okay, and remember, we have fusible interfacing on this side. Now, my fabric is here, and the interfacing is here. They have to be pulled apart, almost like a little paper lantern. And I'm going to snip and snip so that I have sort of a crosswise opening like this. It just makes it easier to pull my fabric through. Now this interfacing will tear, and I don't want it to, so I need to be, you know, gentle and not like I would be if I were pulling 2 pieces of fabric. like this. Now the interfacing should be situated so that when you turn this, the fusible part will be on the inside, and you can take it over to the ironing board and press, and it will attach to the back of this fabric. That is what we're hoping for. Okay. Let's see how pretty that looks. Now I do need to push my corners out, and again, this is a paper, so we need to be gentle when we're pushing out these corners that we don't tear. So I am going to go over to the ironing board, put this interfacing back the way it was, just like that, and give it a press. And it will fuse itself to my fabric. It will close up this little opening here, and it will be good to go as far as applique, because I don't have raw edges. I do want to point out that you are certainly able to do the exact same thing with just a plain piece of fabric. The only difference is this won't fuse unless you have something that you can put down on that. Your fabric isn't going to just fuse to the other fabric. But the great thing about it is it won't matter, because this will be appliqued to your backing fabric. So the opening in the back isn't going to be a deal breaker. All right, I'll be right back with a pressed little piece of fabric. Okay, so here it is, pressed and pretty, and you can't even tell that that was ever cut open. So now when I want to interface, applique this down to my backing fabric, the edges are perfectly closed up, and it will be a pretty applique. I can either do a zigzag stitch, I can do a straight stitch, I can do it by hand, however I want that to look. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up these 3, and I'll see you back here when that's done. All right, here they are. They've all been turned and pressed, trim turned and pressed, and they're ready to be basically mapped out onto this. So after fiddling around with it and trying to get it to look right, I said, you know what, I kind of like it like this. There we go. They do need to be pinned in several places, not just right in the center. The center allows them to shift quite a bit, but I'm happy. And then I'm just kind of true to me, I'm kind of just eyeballing the distance between these two, because again I realize that this is going to need to be a visually appealing table runner, and these little calico or gingham bits are different. They're not all the same size. So I'm having to kind of play around and get them lined up the way they should be lined up to be visually appealing. All right. So my plan is to get these stitched down, and then I will get my piece of batting that I'm going to put on the bottom piece. I don't like to attach batting to the top piece. And then I will make that quilt sandwich. There we go. This just arrived kind of late last night, And I went ahead and opened it because, to be 100% honest, I didn't know what it was, and I'd forgotten that I ordered this. I mean, I knew that I had ordered it. I didn't really forget. I just didn't think that it was going to arrive when it did. It was labeled to arrive later this month, April, that is. So I didn't think it was going to show up before April, which was kind of weird. Okay, so I have a pretty yellow. Oh, and they're all the same type of thread. That was my other issue. I didn't have colors that were going to be the same kind of thread. I had cotton in blue and polyester in green and, you know, just all over the map. So this is all the same type. This is the little collection that is called the Gutermann Creativ, and they spell it without an E, if you can see that right there. And the colors are called spring colors, and it is a cotton thread. Okay, so here is this pretty lime green, and here is a blue that I like on this, and then I think I needed the blue again for down here, and that will do it. Okay, so I'm going to use this blue on this little, oh, you can't see what I'm doing. This blue on this little patch and this little patch. This yellow on this patch, obviously, and this green on this patch. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get George set up for stitching the blue. I've got to figure it out. And then I'll be back. I did want to point out a couple of things. Because this side, or the bobbin side of this particular project, will be encased completely. It will be on the inside of this, then there will be some batting, and then there will be another piece of fabric. I'm not going to worry about the color of the thread that I'm using in my bobbin to a certain extent. I am going to use blue because blue is the color that is most predominant on this particular project. But I don't want to use, if I didn't have blue, I wouldn't want to use something really dark, like this really dark blue, or here's a brown, or a red. I don't, because I would be concerned about a show coming up. You know, the thread could possibly show through. Really doubt it. There's a lot going on between my bobbin and this top piece right here, but it could happen. So I have a bit of yellow on a bobbin. I have a little bit more yellow. I have some beige. I have kind of a turquoisey blue, a lot of that. What I'm looking for is a bobbin that has a lot of thread on it, because it's going to do all of these, not just one, and in a thread that I can, you know, that I can stand to use in that particular project. But that's just me. I don't want to take my, you know, my little expensive Gutermann Creativ threads and wind them up on a bobbin and then just use it just a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit here and a little bit there and have 4 bobbins of color wound up when I don't need to do that. So that is why I am going to use this cotton thread that is wound on a bobbin. There's a lot of it, and I know it will take me through all of these right here. I did also, let's see, I've got to get my bobbin going clockwise. I did also want to give you a little bit more information about the threads that I purchased. I realize I kind of went through a fast, my thread arrived moment there. So these are all, it's 10 spools that you get in that pack, which I will link below this video. So if you just go down below the video in the description and click on show more, I believe that's kind of on the right hand side underneath the video. It sometimes is kind of not, you don't see it, but there's like show more in big letters. And when you click on that, this whole description that I will have included will be provided. This link will be where if you just click on it, poof, it'll take you to Amazon and you'll be able to see this. But it is 10 spools of cotton C-Nay 50, 110 yards. So it is 100% mercerized Egyptian cotton. And they do have different colorways. This one is for spring. I saw autumn, which was really pretty. I didn't look specifically for summer, and I did not look specifically for winter. There's all these different options, and I wanted to point that out. So I've got my bobbin loaded, and now all I have to do is decide. I'm going to go with the blue. So I'm not going to use these two. And like all Gutermann, you just twist this little bottom piece. Right here it will be twisted tight, holding the thread end. And if you twist it to the left, I guess, your thread can be unwound. And then you can twist it back if you want to. And load your machine. And yes, I did clean the bobbin hook area out before I showed you that bobbin color selection. I'm going to trim my thread. I always cut it off at an angle, and I do not wet the end of my thread or my needle. I just simply run my fingers down my needle to remove any static issues, and then without wetting the tip of this thread, once I have just run my fingers down the needle, it is almost always easy to just simply thread the needle. I don't have any problems, and I almost don't have to see it. And my eyes are now, and have always been my whole life, horrible. So as long as I can do that, I'm in good shape. All right, I'm basically there. I've got my machine threaded. It's ready to go. It's in the needle down position, and I am going to use a modified zigzag stitch. Okay, and that is what this stitch looks like. That's the back of it. Stitch number 11, which is this one. I'll just take a picture and pop it right there. These are the two products that I tend to basically use when I'm doing something like this. This is for a bigger patch, like what I have going on currently. So the thing is, I can pin this in the center, and the pins are not going to be in the way of what I'm doing stitching wise. However, these are going to want to move around, these ends. So I can take either my glue stick, and I tend to use the purple because I can see where I'm putting it and it disappears clear when it dries. It's also something that I can use that I can reposition if I need to. And I only need to get it on the edges. I don't need it anywhere else. So I don't need to have it down in the middle of this. I don't want to do all of them at once. I'm going to do them one at a time as I work on them. because this glue will dry and it will stick. And if I use this, it's just going to spray all over the place, which, you know, I'll probably use it to apply the batting, but probably not for these. And I keep this handy. For me, it lives in, it lives in my hazel bag, which is my bag of tools that I use all the time. Okay, so there is that. And the other thing is, if you have a table, you know, to add depth to your sewing machine, like this right here is, it's a place to store extra feet for my machine, but it also adds a little bit of space. If I take it off, then I'm just left with, you know, this arm. If I put it on, it will support more of my fabric. I also have another table that will sit on this if I decide I need that. So that's what I'm going to be doing. Alrighty. And the other thing I could do is go ahead and apply the batting to the back of this if I want to, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to, for this project, do the applique, and then I will treat this as one piece of fabric, and we'll go from there. All right, so I will probably just go ahead and do all of these. I will get them all done so that when you see it again, all of this will have been applied or appliqued to this piece of fabric. So there we go. Each one of these has been basically appliqued to this top piece. The next step, and also I wanted to point out, I did not put a stabilizer on the back of this. However, I would recommend it. I will be putting a piece of binding onto this piece of fabric. Oh, these threads. This fabric right here is very sheddy. I would recommend using pinking shears. I probably should have, but I did not. Okay, so I'll have a backing piece face down with a piece of batting the size of this, and then this face up, and I'm going to simply do I need to decide, don't I? Am I going to do my squigglies, or am I going to do some type of... So let me go grab my batting and I'll be right back. All right, so when I'm doing a table runner for my dining room table, I prefer to use something like Insulbright, because if I put a hot dish or a hot plate or anything on this, I don't want that heat transfer to go down into the wood on my table. Now I will say my table is very heavily protected. I don't ever put anything on it without using either a trivet or something with this in it, in addition to a regular mat that goes between my table and my tablecloth. But I still like to use the Insulbright because you just never know, and I do not want anything to happen to my dining room table. So I don't cut Insulbright with my regular fabric scissors because it has a metal product in there. It is not safe for microwave use. So if you were going to make like one of those soup bowl holders, you can't put that in the microwave. You can microwave your soup bowl in a microwavable safe dish and put it in your soup bowl if you put this in there. But I generally don't like to use anything that's going to go in the microwave. I won't put Insulbright in it, just to be safe. All right, I am probably going to use, as crazy as it sounds, I'm going to probably use 2 pieces because that's just extra protection. And that's not long enough. I was hoping I could get away with it, but it wouldn't work. So let's try this side. There we go. All right, it does not have to go all the way to the edge, and it does not have to go all the way to the edge. So all I have to do is flip it over and, okay. Now you can draw this onto the Insulbright, you know, take a pencil and just draw around it, or you can just simply cut it. But I'm going to draw. Now I have got mine off of the edge over here by quite a bit, and when I distribute this equally between these 2 pieces, if I just use this as my line, then the distance will only be half that, which is what I'm looking for. So, and I'm going to do the same thing on the end. Is that marking? No. Let's use a Sharpie. All right, so the same thing here on this end, which I don't think you can see because my light is in the way. There we go. This is off the edge by twice as much as I want it to be, but when I shift this down over the top of this, it will be equally distributed. And I'll show you what I mean. I know that sounds really confusing, but eventually, when you've been doing this for a while, you kind of get the idea. All right, and I'm going to make this a little bit less. So there's that line. I don't know if it's visible. Now I can remove my fabric. Like I said earlier, I don't use my Kais. I'll use my paper cutting or plastic cutting or Insulbright cutting scissors. All right, and I don't have to cut this. I could if I wanted to, but I don't have to. It can stay folded, which is fine with me. Alrighty, so now this goes here, and that goes there. Now this is what I mean by sort of settling this Insulbright in on the fabric. So I may need to cut it a little bit smaller because it is kind of hanging out over here on the edge. This for me works a lot better, and the visual of splitting the difference, I have a little bit of fabric up here at the top, and I have a little bit of fabric here on this lower edge, and I have fabric here, and I have fabric here. I do need to shift this a little bit this way. There we go. So now I feel like this is in a very good place on my project. I am not comfortable using this spray and bond on the front part of my fabric. I will spray it on the Insel Bright, but I am not going to spray my fabric. I've had problems with it staining, and once it does, it's a glue and it won't release like I really want it to. So I'm going to do this one first, meaning I'm going to spray this side. And if your fabric has a one-way design, make sure that you put the fabric down onto your batting the way you want it to be placed. Okay, and then apply pressure like so, and flip it over, and I'm going to do this side right here. Follow the directions on this. Go. So if you need to move your project, if it's not in the right place, if you don't like where it is, just lift it up. And shift it to the place you want it to be. Press down. Now, I usually go from the center out at this point. Okay. Now, I am not going to be stitching these edges. These will be enclosed with my binding. So I don't have to worry about what they look like right now. That's just not really a topic for me at the moment. What I am going to be doing is the quilting. But Laurie, you're not a quilter. No, I'm not a quilter. I'm not someone who has ever put a quilt together. But I can do quilting stitches, and so can you. I'm just going to stitch right there. I have a top, I have a batting in the center, and I have a back. That's basically what you have for a quilt. So I can say I'm going to quilt it. I can say I'm going to stitch it together. Basically the same thing. Okay, now, trying to decide, do I want to use white? I think I do. Let me see. Yeah, I think I'm going to go ahead and use white on all of them because the predominant color here is white. Wow. Ooh, it's stuck. There we go. Right. So I will find a white bobbin. Do I want to use a white? I don't think I want to use a white bobbin on the bottom. I think I'm going to stick with the blue that is in the machine. It's a what I would call a medium blue. It's right here. I think it would be fine. I'm not going to worry about the bobbin thread. And as I said earlier, my stitching will be right around these white rounded squares. And I'm just going to stitch right over the top of whatever happens to be in the way. I'm not stitching on the yellow. I'm stitching on that white. I'm not stitching on the green, I'm stitching on the white as I go. So the next step is to cut that binding from the extra fabric that I have and trim out the threads. Okay, they're like little quilted trivets. I don't know if you can see, but there's a stitching line on the front side, and then on the back, that's what that looks like. Okay. All right, so the next little bit here is to measure what I need. And clearly, so the next bit is to cut the binding. And this piece of fabric is cut to nearly the exact same length as this fabric. So I'm going to cut two 2-inch strips this way, and then I will remeasure and cut for two 2-inch strips on each short end. So to begin, let me grab my tape measure. I have returned with my pressed binding or sashing, however you want to refer to that. I think both, well, I'm not sure. I think more binding, less sashing. Okay, so folded in half and pressed. And we're going to start with the long edges. So I'll just move those out of the way, set that aside, and we'll see what we've got. So of course, remember the raw edges, not the folded edge, but the raw edges will be two right together because they've been matched up and pressed. They will go on the raw edge of the project. So raw edges meet up. Let's get just a little bit closer. And we need to kind of keep about 1 inch of this off of our project. And I like to just kind of measure this and make adjustments before I start sewing. So if something I've done has not, you know, if this is shorter than I thought it was, then I'll have to make adjustments to my piece or cut another one of these binding pieces. But I have a good solid inch on this end as well. Alright, so the deal is we're going to stitch right along this edge at about 1/4 inch, and then it will be able to flip over this way. We'll finish stitching this way, and then we're going to do the same thing on this side. So in my case, I'm going to say this is A, this is B. If they were all the same size, if A, B, C, and D were all the same size, I would definitely mark my binding. or I would mark my project. I want a long stitch, mainly because I'm going through, at this point, 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of fabric and 2 pieces of Insulbright. It's pretty thick. Okay. And I'm going to use the needle down position because it will act like a third hand and help me hold all of this together. Now I want to make sure before I begin that my fabric is flat. Okay, so I'm going to have to adjust my stitching plan. Rethinking. I think I've come up with an idea that will appeal to me, and that is to make sure that I have this folded edge of the binding just visually for me as I'm stitching it right along this folded edge of these little square appliques. And that sets me back far enough from the edge that I will actually catch all of the 4 pieces of fabric, which I have to do. So if I set that there and pull my binding down so I have an inch hanging off the edge over, over here, I won't be able to use the Wonder Clips, but that's okay. I can either pin it or I can just do this by hand. Probably should pin a few. So let's see. If that is there, right, okay. So if I am making sure that the folded edge is riding along the edge of the applique and I am 1/4 of an inch away off of the binding edge, I should have enough to fold over. I may have to trim these, which that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. It might not be your preferred method, but in this case, I think with this project, it may be my only option. So if I'm going to do it by machine, which I am. So let's just see what happens. It truly wants to slide off. I don't sew over pins. So I'm keeping the edge of this foot right on the edge of my binding. Now, before I go any further, I want to see what this looks like when I fold it over. And of course I will have to press. So see, I'm trying to make sure that this is all captured on this side. And that seems to have done the trick. I do have a thread here. It's actually a fabric fiber. Here and here. Okay, and here. Okay. All right, so what happens now is I don't do anything else with this. Nothing. And I go ahead and apply this side in the same manner. So the folded edge, I have to check for the inch off of each end first. So right there, and then hold it down. And there we go. Okay, so I have enough on each end, and I'll just line this folded edge up with where the applique stitched edge is, and leave myself 1/4 inch and stitch this down. I have finished both of the long edges of the table runner. Let me pull this down where you can see it a little bit. All right, now that we have attached the A and B on the edges, the long edges of the table runner, we can cut them flush. The reason we don't cut them flush and then apply them is that the stitching process can distort these ends, so that if this were exactly the same size, you might actually end up with it off one way or the other. Sometimes it'll even kind of pull it in a weird, like a concave almost kind of situation. But now that they're applied, all 4 of these long ends that we left can just simply be snipped off, like so, because they won't distort now that they're already applied. So I'm going to do all 4. Make sure you're getting a clean cut. You can either use your scissors or just take your little 6-inch Omni Grid if you have one, your rotary cutter, lay it right along this edge right here, and cut. Okay, so that is nice and tidy. Alrighty. Now the next step, of course, is to apply the short edge. Alright, and we're going to line up the raw edges again. The fold will be right here, just like it was on the other 2. And this needs to extend out on both ends. And so do these. So they don't stay like this. They are pushed out, and this is applied. That's why it needs to be more than or just at 1 inch when you cut these, because you will then be opening the binding on the other sides. And if you have a square, obviously the A, B, C, D method has to be well documented as you're going, otherwise you're going to forget, you're going to get lost. Alright, I need my pin cushion. And I need to pin it this way. I'm back. I have stitched both short edges on, and the next step, of course, is to trim off these long pieces level or even with the fold on the long edges. And this is where it can get a little tricky, because if you're not careful, you can cut into this fold. This is the folded edge right here, and we're pushing it out. So I like to use scissors when I do it on these last 2 pieces, and I'm going to get rid of this thread. And I'm going to move like a snail. I'm going to be very careful and make sure that I do not cut any part of this fold. Just kind of put my finger in the way and carefully snip this off so that you have that. We need to do that on all 4 sides, so I'll go ahead and finish doing the other 3. I do actually prefer to hold it up in the air when I do it. I feel like I have a little bit more control. You want to cut it straight, not at an angle. Okay. We'll do the other 2. Okay, so they've all been cut, and now it's time. I'm going to go over to the ironing board and I'm going to press all of these out, make sure I like the way they look. There's a spot right here that I can't stand. It's been bothering me since I put this on, and I think what I'm going to do is just stitch a little bit closer to the edge. I feel like that's the fix it needs. There's a lot of bulk in this project with those 2 layers of Insulbright, and it's distorting just right here. So the way I'm planning to try to fix it is drop my needle right on top of that line of stitching and then just kind of come this way with my sewing a little bit. And then just meet up with the original for a few inches. And let's just see what that looks like. I didn't lock stitches, so if I need to, I can just take them out and do it again. Let's see if that's even or uneven. Much more even right there. Okay, so I will go press. There's so many little pieces of lint. Oh my goodness. But that's what happens when you work with fiber. Okay, so once I get this folded down, it'll be time to, do our binding, where we'll be wrapping it to the back. And then you can stitch it if you want to on the sewing machine, or you can do an applique stitch all the way around. In the past, I've almost always done the applique stitch. I may do that again today. I'm not sure. We'll see what it looks like, but then it will make sense how we're supposed to finish off these edges. So let me get this pressed and I'll be right back. All right, it's been pressed out. So the next step is to fold everything around to the back, which is this, and then decide how I want to stitch. If I want to try to just stitch in the ditch, my guess is this side will not be displayed, so I really could attempt to do it where it would look neat and tidy. But oftentimes what happens is I'll be stitching along, and then I'll just hit some random spot in the fabric that will cause the needle to jump, and I'll end up down too low or too high, and it looks so untidy to me that I'm always, every single time I just convince myself I need to sew this by hand. So I think that's probably what I'm going to do. All right, so this is how we do these ends. So here we have the pushed out long side and the pushed out short side. Maybe if I turn it this way. So we have a bit of our fabric right here that is a raw edge. This is from the long piece that we cut off right there. Now if I fold this in right here, I'm on the long, I'll just unwind it so you can see this is the long edge. I'm going to fold that over and I'll just clip it so it will stay like so. That folded raw edge will be enclosed. Let me get it where you can see. I need a cameraman. Okay. So as you can see, I'm bringing this raw edge right here. This one right here to the inside. So it's automatically, that's enclosed. And then when I come along and I'm going to fold this down and stitch it, that automatically encloses this raw edge. So I'll do the long side first. That closes in the raw edge here. And then I'll come back over and do this short edge, and that will enclose this raw edge. So when I do a project like this, I will go along, and I do use my clips because they just tend to stay longer without falling out, and they don't hurt me. You guys know how I am just a magnet for pins. Okay, I might have to trim this a little bit more. I did earlier go along and trim my seam allowances down, but let's just see. I'm going to use my duckbill Ginger scissors. You don't want to cut your stitches, and you don't want to cut your binding. So these duckbill scissors, although I don't like using them on a product like Insulbright, when the heck else am I going to use them? Alright, I have one whole side is clipped, and I will flip it around. I'm going to do the other long side. So that goes in like so, and then I'm going to fold this in like this and fold it, the folded edge down on top. And I can really manipulate that so much better with my hand sewing needle than I can with the sewing machine needle. I just find it a much better outcome. So my task for the rest of this day will be to stitch this binding down, and that's fine. I am going to see if I can talk to my sister. As many of you know, she lives in Alabama, and they are absolutely inundated with bad spring storms. They have had multitude of thunderstorms, lightning storms, and tornadoes today. The creek on her property has basically flooded, definitely breached the banks. So I don't know if she'll be able to talk to me, but as you know, we have our conversation every afternoon. So while I talk to her, I will stitch this down, and then when I come back, you'll get to see the final finished product and my plans for, these, which I know I've talked about, but real quick, before I do, I think I have enough. Just looking at it, I need a back, a back, a back. Ooh, maybe not enough. Sometimes you have to turn things a weird way. Let's try it like that. Yes. Yep. We do have enough to get all 4 of them a back. And I'm going to make 4 little spring pillows. They're not going to be this big. They will be, you know, about like so. All the way around. And I'm just going to put them in a bowl on my coffee table in the living room. I mean, they're just adorable. So anyway, I'll see you back here pretty soon. Alrighty, I have finished the spring table runner. I love the way it turned out. I think it's really pretty. It will decorate the table nicely for Easter and on through spring and summer.